I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. I'm 28, female, and my sister Jenny is 26, female. We were close growing up, but things have shifted in the last few years, and I think I may have just blown everything up. I married my high school sweetheart, Ron, when we were both 22. We'd been together since we were 16, and we got married right after college. Back then, Ron made about $35,000 at a small tech startup, and I worked as a receptionist making about the same. We were broke, living in a one-bedroom apartment, driving beat-up cars and surviving on ramen, but we were happy. Jenny, still in college then, used to tease us about playing house, but it felt like harmless sibling stuff. She was even in our wedding and seemed genuinely supportive. Things changed after Ron's startup got acquired in 2022. Overnight, he went from making $35,000 to over $200,000. And we got a decent payout. We bought a house, paid off loans, and finally had savings. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, and that's when Jenny's attitude started to shift. She began making little comments how I picked a winner or lucked out in love when Ron's salary increased again to $300,000. Her remarks became more pointed. Around the same time, she started dating Marcus, a surgeon who likely makes $400,000 and comes from a wealthy family. From the start, she was vocal about how much she loved his lifestyle, sending me pictures of designer gifts, fancy restaurants, and bragging about dating someone established. I didn't judge her. Financial security matters. But Jenny began using her relationship to insult mine. She'd say things like, "At least Marcus was already successful," or imply that Ron only had potential when I married him. Eventually, she escalated to calling me a gold digger in front of our family. The first time was during our mom's birthday dinner. Ron mentioned a Europe trip for our anniversary and Jenny laughed. "Must be nice being a gold digger." Everyone went quiet. At Easter, she made another jab in a fake sweet tone about how I hit the jackpot with Ron. What hurt most was how others began echoing her. A cousin joked about me being a smart investor, and our aunt asked if I worried about Ron's company folding. Jenny had planted a seed, and it was spreading. I confronted her multiple times, saying the comments were hurtful and unfair. I'd been with Ron since he was broke. She just brushed it off. "If the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it." Or say I was too sensitive. Meanwhile, she texts me constantly about Marcus, practically treating me like her relationship diary. She told me she wasn't attracted to him at first, but that his lifestyle made him grow on her. She once texted that she had learned from my mistakes and was playing the game better, proud that she chose someone already rich and would never have to worry about money. I never confronted her about the hypocrisy. I'd usually just say, "I'm glad you are happy," and move on, but I saved the screenshots. Then came Jenny's engagement party 2 weeks ago. Marcus proposed last month and they threw a huge event at a fancy country club. Ron and I got them a nice gift, and I even helped Jenny pick out her dress. I was trying to be supportive. Halfway through the party, Jenny gave a speech. It started sweet. She praised Marcus and talked about authentic love. But then she said she was lucky to have found someone who loved her for who she really was, not for what he could get from her. She wasn't looking at me, but I felt everyone's eyes on me. Then she raised her glass and said, "Here's to real love, not gold digging." This time she looked straight at me. I was humiliated. I left the room shaking. In the bathroom, I snapped. I pulled up the screenshots she'd sent me over the months, especially the one where she said she was playing the game better than I had and that Marcus's money made her love him. I created a group text with Jenny, both our parents and Marcus. I sent 5 screenshots with the message. Jenny, I think you accidentally sent these to me instead of Marcus. Thought he should see how much you love him for who he really is. Then I turned off my phone, told Ron I felt sick, and we left. I turned my phone back on at home. It was chaos. Jenny had called 17 times, dozens of angry texts followed, calling me every name in the book. My parents were messaging, even Marcus texted asking if we could talk. From what I've gathered, Jenny tried claiming the texts were taken out of context or misunderstood, but the evidence was damning. Apparently Marcus left the party early and Jenny's friends were trying to figure out what happened. She keeps saying I violated her privacy and ruined her engagement. But the irony is hard to ignore. She's publicly called me a gold digger for months, mocking a marriage I've been in since Ron was broke. But the second her gold digging gets exposed, suddenly I'm the villain for sharing private messages? I know I went nuclear. I could have handled it differently, maybe confronted her privately or just gone no contact. But I was done being humiliated in front of my family. I was done defending a relationship that predates any of Ron's success. Now, I don't know where we stand. I haven't spoken to anyone in my family since. Ron's been supportive, but I know he's biased. I'm torn between feeling like I finally stood up for myself and fearing I just destroyed my relationship with my sister forever. So here's my question. Was I wrong to do what I did? Should I have taken the high road while she kept taking shots at my marriage? Or did she bring this on herself with her constant public hypocrisy? What would you have done? Update 1. I wasn't sure if I should update this since the original post got way more attention than I expected. But a lot has happened in the past few days and I could use some more advice. First off, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. The responses were pretty mixed. Some people thought I was completely justified, others thought I went too far, and some thought we were both in the wrong. Reading through all the comments actually helped me process what happened and think about it more objectively. So here's what's happened since the engagement party disaster. The day after I posted, my mom called me. I'd been avoiding everyone's calls, but I knew I couldn't hide forever. She was upset, but not as angry as I'd expected. She said she talked to both Jenny and Marcus after Ron and I left the party and that things were complicated. Apparently, Marcus didn't storm out immediately after I sent the screenshots. He actually stayed for another hour or so, but he was quiet and seemed to be thinking. Jenny tried to do damage control by saying I'd taken things out of context and that those texts were just me misunderstanding her sense of humor. But my mom said Marcus looked skeptical, especially about the text where Jenny explicitly said she was playing the game better than I by dating someone who was already rich. My mom asked me to come over so we could talk in person, and I finally agreed. When I got there, she said she'd been thinking about Jenny's behavior over the past few months and that she'd noticed the gold digger comments too. She said she'd tried to brush them off as sisterly teasing, but then they'd been bothering her more and more. Then my mom said something that really surprised me. She told me that Jenny had called her crying the night before. Not just about Marcus, but about money in general. Apparently, Jenny has been struggling financially way more than she'd let on. She'd been living beyond her means, trying to keep up with Marcus's lifestyle, putting things on credit cards, borrowing money from our parents without telling me. My mom said Jenny had asked to borrow $2,000 just last month to pay her credit card bill, and that she'd been making comments about feeling insecure about not making as much money as Marcus. My mom thinks Jenny's gold digger comments about me were coming from her own insecurity about her financial situation and her relationship with Marcus. This actually made a lot of things click into place. Jenny works as a marketing coordinator and probably makes around $45,000 a year. Marcus makes almost 10 times that, plus he comes from money. I'd noticed that Jenny had been dressing differently and going to more expensive places since they started dating, but I hadn't really thought about how she was paying for it all. My mom asked me if I'd be willing to talk to Jenny directly, and I said I'd think about it. But honestly, I was still pretty hurt and angry. Even if Jenny was acting out of insecurity, that didn't excuse months of public humiliation. The next day, I got a text from Marcus asking if we could meet for coffee. I was nervous about it, but Ron encouraged me to go. I figured I owed him at least a conversation since I'd basically dropped a bomb on his relationship. Meeting with Marcus was actually really eye-opening. He's a lot more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. He said he'd had some concerns about Jenny's motivations for a while, but that he'd been ignoring them because he really cared about her. He said the screenshots I'd sent weren't entirely surprising, but that seeing them spelled out so clearly had forced him to confront some things he'd been avoiding. Marcus told me that Jenny had been pushing for a very expensive wedding and honeymoon, way beyond what even he was comfortable spending. She'd been hinting about wanting a bigger engagement ring and had made several comments about him buying her a new car. He said he'd started to feel like their relationship was becoming transactional, but that he'd been hoping it was just her way of showing affection. But here's what really got to me. Marcus said he'd looked back at their early text conversations after seeing my screenshots, and that he'd noticed Jenny had started being much more affectionate and interested in him right after their third date, which was when he'd mentioned what he did for work and where he lived. He said their first 2 dates had been pretty lukewarm, but that she'd suddenly become much more enthusiastic once she realized how much money he made. Marcus also said that Jenny had never really shown much interest in his work or his family, but that she was always very interested in hearing about his financial investments and his family's medical practices. He said she'd asked him detailed questions about his salary and his family's net worth, which had seemed odd at the time. I felt terrible listening to all of this. Whatever issues I had with Jenny, I never wanted to hurt Marcus or ruin what might have been a genuine relationship. I told him I was sorry for the way I'd handled things and that I should have found a better way to deal with the situation. But Marcus said he was actually grateful, even though it hurt. He said he'd rather know the truth now than find out after they were married. He told me he was going to take some time to think about their relationship and figure out what he wanted to do. That same evening, Jenny finally called me directly. She was furious and crying at the same time. She accused me of being jealous and vindictive and said I'd ruined the best thing that had ever happened to her. She said Marcus had been distant since the party and that she was afraid he was going to break up with her. I tried to stay calm and told her that I'd only shared things she'd said to me directly, and that if those things were damaging to her relationship, maybe she should think about why that was. That just made her angrier. She said I'd betrayed her trust and that those texts were private conversations between sisters. I pointed out that she'd been publicly humiliating me in front of our family for months, and that she couldn't expect privacy and sisterly loyalty when she'd been treating me like crap. She said that was different because she was just joking and that I was too sensitive. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me after saying she'd never forgive me and that I destroyed her life out of jealousy. Yesterday, my mom called again to update me. Apparently, Jenny had gone to my parents' house and had a complete breakdown. She admitted that she'd been struggling to keep up with Marcus financially and that she'd been borrowing money and maxing out credit cards. She also admitted that the gold digger comments about me were coming from her own guilt about her motivations for dating Marcus. My mom said Jenny finally acknowledged that she'd been unfair to me, but that she was still angry about me sharing the screenshots publicly instead of talking to her privately first. Jenny apparently said she did care about Marcus, but that she wasn't sure if she loved him for himself or for the security he represented. My mom asked if I'd be willing to meet with Jenny to try to work things out, but I'm honestly not sure I'm ready for that. I'm glad she's finally being honest about her behavior, but I'm still hurt by months of public humiliation, and I'm not sure I trust her not to go back to the same behavior once this all blows over. Ron thinks I should stick to my guns and not reach out until Jenny gives me a real apology and commits to stopping the gold digger comments permanently. But part of me misses my sister and wants to try to repair our relationship. I don't know what's going to happen with Jenny and Marcus. My mom thinks he's probably going to break up with her, which makes me feel guilty, even though I know it's not really my fault. If their relationship was strong enough to survive this, then maybe it would have been fine. But if my screenshots were enough to end it, then maybe it wasn't built on a solid foundation anyway. I'm still processing everything and trying to figure out what I want to do next. Should I reach out to Jenny and try to fix our relationship? Or should I wait for her to make the first move? And how do I deal with the guilt about potentially ruining her relationship, even though she brought it on herself? This whole situation has been emotionally exhausting, and I feel like I'm still in the middle of it rather than seeing any resolution. Any advice on how to move forward would be really appreciated. Update 2. Okay, so things have taken a pretty dramatic turn, and I'm honestly not sure how to process everything that's happened. I thought the situation was complicated before, but it just got a whole lot messier. 2 days ago, I was still debating whether to reach out to Jenny when Marcus called me again. He sounded different this time, more serious, kind of urgent. He asked if we could meet in person because he had something important to tell me. And he specifically asked me not to mention it to Jenny or my parents yet. I met him at the same coffee shop where we'd talked before, and he looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. He said he'd been doing some thinking since our last conversation and that he decided to do some digging into Jenny's background and their relationship. Then he told me something that completely blindsided me. He said he'd hired a private investigator. I know that sounds extreme, but Marcus explained that he'd been burned before by someone who was only interested in his money, and that my screenshots had triggered some red flags for him. He said he needed to know the truth about Jenny's motivations before he made any decisions about their relationship. What the private investigator found was way worse than anything I could have imagined. First, Jenny's financial situation is much more dire than any of us knew. She doesn't just have credit card debt. She owes over $30,000 across multiple cards. and has taken out a personal loan she can't afford. She's been borrowing money from our parents, but she's also been borrowing from friends and even took a cash advance from her work, 401k. But that's not even the worst part. The investigator found out that Jenny had been researching Marcus online before their first date. Not just casual social media stalking, but deep research into his family's wealth, his medical practice, even his real estate holdings. She'd found articles about his family's business and had looked up property records to see what his house was worth. Marcus showed me printouts of what the investigator had found. Jenny had apparently spent hours researching his background before they ever met. She knew exactly how much money he made and what his family was worth before she ever swiped right on his dating profile. But here's the really crazy part. Jenny had been dating other wealthy men at the same time she started seeing Marcus. The investigator found evidence that she'd been on dates with at least 2 other guys during their first month of dating, both of whom were also wealthy professionals. She'd apparently been keeping her options open until she decided Marcus was the best financial prospect. Marcus looked absolutely crushed while he was telling me all of this. He said he'd really thought Jenny cared about him, and that even after my screenshots, he'd been hoping there was some genuine feeling there. But the evidence was pretty overwhelming that she'd targeted him specifically for his wealth, and had been calculating about it from the very beginning. Then Marcus dropped another bombshell. He said the investigator had also found evidence that Jenny had been bad-mouthing me and Ron to some of her friends, specifically about our money. Apparently she'd been telling people that I was a fake who was pretending to be modest about Ron's success and that I was actually materialistic and spoiled. She'd been painting herself as the more authentic sister who was honest about wanting financial security. I was honestly speechless. It was one thing for Jenny to make gold digger comments to my face or in front of family, but to find out she'd been systematically trying to damage my reputation behind my back was a whole other level of betrayal. Marcus apologized for having me investigated too, but he said the PI had looked into Ron and me as well to get the full picture. He said everything checked out with our story, that Ron and I had been together since high school, that we'd struggled financially for years, and that Ron's success had been unexpected and gradual. He said it was clear that our relationship was genuine and that Jenny's claims about me being a gold digger were completely unfounded. After Marcus left, I sat in my car for probably an hour, just trying to process everything. I felt vindicated about defending myself, but I also felt sick about what Jenny had been doing. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or jealousy. This was calculated manipulation and deception. I decided I had to tell Ron everything. When I got home and explained what Marcus had found, Ron was furious. He said he'd suspected Jenny was jealous, but he'd never imagined she was actively trying to sabotage our reputation. He was especially angry about Jenny researching Marcus and dating multiple wealthy men at once, because he said it proved that her attacks on me were pure projection. That night, Marcus texted me to let me know he'd broken up with Jenny. He said he'd confronted her with the evidence the investigator had found and that she'd initially tried to deny it but had eventually broken down and admitted everything. He said she'd begged him to reconsider and had promised to change, but that he couldn't trust her anymore. The next morning, all hell broke loose. Jenny started calling and texting me nonstop, and she was absolutely hysterical. She was screaming at me through the phone, saying I'd ruined her life and that I'd turned Marcus against her. She said she was going to lose her apartment because she couldn't afford rent without Marcus's help, and that I'd destroyed her future out of spite. I tried to stay calm and told her that I hadn't told Marcus to hire a private investigator, and that the things he'd found out were her own actions coming back to haunt her. But she wasn't listening. She kept saying it was all my fault and that she'd never done anything as bad as what I'd done to her. Then Jenny said something that really got to me. She said she'd only been trying to secure her future and that there was nothing wrong with wanting financial stability. She said I was a hypocrite because I'd benefited from Ron's success too, and that the only difference was that I'd gotten lucky while she'd had to be more strategic. I told her there was a huge difference between supporting your partner through financial struggles and then enjoying success together, versus targeting someone specifically for their wealth and manipulating them. I said what she'd done to Marcus was cruel and deceptive, and that her attacks on me had been unfair and hurtful. The conversation ended with Jenny saying she was done with our whole family and that we'd all chosen Marcus over her. She said she was going to move away and start over somewhere else and that we'd be sorry when she was gone. My parents called me later that day in a panic. Jenny had shown up at their house with a bunch of suitcases, saying she was moving back in temporarily because she couldn't afford her rent. She told them some version of what had happened, but she'd painted herself as the victim and made it sound like Marcus had broken up with her because of lies I'd told him. My mom asked me to come over so we could all talk together, but I wasn't sure I was ready for that confrontation. I asked if Jenny was willing to acknowledge what she'd actually done, and my mom said Jenny was still insisting that she'd been unfairly targeted and that Marcus had overreacted. I'm honestly at a loss here. Part of me feels vindicated that the truth came out about Jenny's behavior, but I also feel terrible about how everything exploded. I never wanted to destroy my sister's life, even though she'd been treating me horribly. Ron thinks I should cut contact with Jenny entirely until she's willing to take full responsibility for her actions and give me a genuine apology. He says Jenny's financial problems and relationship issues are consequences of her own choices, and that I shouldn't feel guilty about exposing the truth. But she's still my sister, and seeing her lose everything is hard to watch, even though I know she brought it on herself. My parents are caught in the middle and keep asking me to try to work things out with her, but I don't see how that's possible when she still won't admit she did anything wrong. I also feel bad for Marcus, even though he seems to be handling everything well. He deserved better than being manipulated and deceived, and I'm glad he found out the truth before they got married. But I still feel like I played a role in blowing up his relationship, even though Jenny's actions were what really caused the damage. I don't know what Jenny's going to do now. My parents can't support her financially long term, and she's going to have to figure out how to deal with her debt and her living situation. Part of me wants to help her, but I also don't want to enable her behavior or let her off the hook for what she did. This whole situation has been a nightmare, and I'm not sure when or how it's going to resolve. Has anyone else dealt with a family situation like this? How do you handle it when someone you love has been systematically deceiving and manipulating people, including you? I'm torn between wanting to protect myself and wanting to help my sister, but I don't even know if she wants help or if she's capable of changing. Update 3. I didn't think things could get any crazier, but here we are. I'm writing this update to process what's happened and share it with those of you who've been following along. First, to clarify, many asked whether Marcus's hiring a PI was legal. From what I've found, yes, it's legal. If the PI uses public records and doesn't trespass or obtain private info illegally. While extreme, Marcus had been burned before and wanted to protect himself. After my last update, I took Jake's advice and kept my distance from Jenny until she took responsibility. My parents weren't thrilled, but I told them I needed space. Jenny stayed with them, mostly isolating in her room. She'd been placed on a performance review at work, likely due to how much her emotional state was affecting her. Then, 3 days ago, Marcus called me, shaken. Jenny had been calling, texting, showing up at his house and office since the breakup. He tried to ignore her until she followed him to a restaurant, confronted him in front of his friends, and created a scene. She cried, said she loved him, and begged for another chance. Marcus was considering a restraining order but wanted to give her a chance to back off voluntarily. Hearing that made me feel awful. I told Marcus I'd speak to my parents about getting Jenny some help because clearly this wasn't just heartbreak, it was spiraling. That same day, my mom called in tears. Jenny had been obsessively stalking Marcus online, staying up all night, writing letters to him, and convinced she could win him back. Worse, she started saying I had orchestrated everything to ruin her life, claiming I was jealous and had turned Marcus against her. My mom was worried Jenny might confront me, so she asked Ron and me to stay elsewhere while they sought professional help for her. The next day, my worst fears came true. While I was at work, Jenny showed up at our house. Jake, who was working from home, saw her pounding on the door, screaming that I had stolen her life. He called the police, who asked her to leave. She sat in her car outside for another hour before driving off. We immediately installed security cameras and started taking extra precautions. I notified my manager in case Jenny tried to contact me at work. That evening, my dad told me Jenny had agreed to check into a short-term mental health facility after the therapist recommended intensive treatment for anxiety and depression. Initially, she'd refused, but after the incident at our house, my parents gave her an ultimatum: get help or move out. She agreed to a 2-week program. My mom called to say Jenny had apologized for scaring us, but still felt I'd been unfair. She wasn't fully owning up to everything, but we're hopeful therapy might help. Honestly, I feel relief more than anything. This began with her insulting my marriage and escalated into a full breakdown. I've questioned whether I should have handled things differently. Maybe talked to her privately instead of exposing her at the engagement party. But the truth would have come out eventually. The PI uncovered things I hadn't even known. Ron has been incredibly supportive, constantly reminding me I didn't cause her financial mess, her lies, or her mental health issues. I just brought the truth to light. Marcus texted me to say Jenny hadn't contacted him since being admitted, and while the drama was hard, he's glad he found out the truth before making bigger commitments. He said the experience taught him to trust red flags. My mom admitted she'd seen signs Jenny was unraveling, but thought it was just wedding stress. My dad's been helping Jenny sort out her finances, which are worse than expected. Nearly $40,000 in debt when including penalties and loans. They're helping a bit, but made it clear Jenny needs to take responsibility going forward. The therapist gave an update yesterday. Jenny's participating, but still resistant to taking full accountability. Apparently, her fixation on Marcus and anger towards me are common in people who externalize blame instead of looking inward. I've been reflecting a lot on our relationship. I miss the sister I used to be close with. But it's hard to reconcile that person with the one who's been deceiving and manipulating people for months. Looking back, there were signs Jenny had always been status conscious and competitive. In college, she dated someone purely for his future earning potential. She often implied I got lucky with Jake. I think Jake's success magnified her own insecurities And instead of dealing with them, she projected them onto me. This whole experience has been emotionally draining, but also revealing. I've learned to set stronger boundaries and stop tolerating humiliation just because it comes from family. Exposing the truth might have been messy, but it stopped the lies from continuing. Ron and I have grown closer through it all. We've had deep conversations about how to handle family issues and committed to always backing each other no matter how complicated things get. As for what happens when Jenny gets out next week, I don't know. My parents want me to be open to reconciliation, but I've made it clear that would depend on Jenny fully owning her actions and showing real change. I'm no longer willing to be her emotional punching bag. Do I regret exposing the screenshots at her engagement party? Sometimes. Sometimes. Maybe I should have approached Marcus privately or given Jenny a warning. But after months of taking her insults, I snapped. I was tired of staying silent while she dragged my name through the mud. This ordeal has taught me a lot about jealousy, financial pressure, and how toxic family dynamics can become. I genuinely hope Jenny gets better and finds peace, but I also know that protecting myself and my marriage comes first. Ron and I are planning a quiet vacation soon to decompress and talk about starting a family of our own. We're committed to creating a supportive, emotionally healthy home, something I now realize is more important than ever. Thanks to everyone who followed along and offered support. I'll update again if something big happens, but hopefully this is the beginning of healing for everyone involved. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.